All right, so I'd like to go ahead and introduce our next speakers. So up next we have Dave Marion. Dave's Principal Software Engineer at Vistronics. He's also a Accumulo PMC member. Jim Klukar. Jim is a Principal Software Engineer at Paraxis, an Accumulo contributor. And then down the end, Mr. Drew Ferris from Booz Allen. Drew, also Accumulo PMC, and I think you're also a mentor for a number of the incubator projects as well. So give me a warm round of welcome for these guys. They're going to talk about Timely.
Good afternoon. My name is Dave. I'm going to be giving an overview and history, talking about some of the architecture and deployments. I'm going to switch over to Jim. Jim's going to do a live demo with hopefully no gremlins, and then Drew's going to talk about some of the security features. So sorry for any slide issues. If there's spacing issues or whatever, they were transferred from one medium to another, probably multiple times. Timely. So built on Accumulo, uses Netty. It's a Java application. And provides secure access to labeled data, right? So we get that through Accumulo. But we also honor it in the app and in Grafana and over an SSL-enabled transport. Some history. So Ganglia and some of the other monitoring tools never really worked out real well for us. So we tried something early on, it didn't work. We had some time recently and we decided to take another stab at creating something. I surveyed the space looking at like InfluxDB and some of the other monitoring tools, Netflix's Atlas and some other open source stuff. We decided to try using OpenTSDB, using Eric's shim code that he wrote, I think a couple years ago. We got that working pretty easily, pretty quickly on a single machine, but it didn't stand up when we got it to our cluster. We couldn't get past this error that was down inside of a library that OpenTSDB used with recursion and callbacks and things like that. The issue's noted right there. It's still open as of a couple weeks ago, and it's been open for a couple years. So at that point, we had already invested a lot of time in working with OpenTSDB and Grafana. So we decided just to reverse engineer the OpenTSDB data source that Grafana used and take that API and just write our own thing to that API. And Eric and I did that, and we had something working in a couple weeks. At that point, we were getting data in, we were getting data out, it was being displayed on the charts and things like that. So that's the history. The architecture is pretty simple. It started off a little more complex. Basically, insert data, query interface for Grafana, and an API to get data out. Basically, we just want to be this lightweight as possible application that's just doing this time series with security translation on top of Accumulo. So security is optional. We integrated Spring Security, and Drew's going to talk about that. If you put data in with column visibilities, then only people that have those authorizations can see that data. You could put unlabeled data in all day long, it works the same. Yeah. Getting data in, we support a text and a binary format. This text format is based on the OpenTSDB put format. It's just a metric, a timestamp, a value, and a set of tags. Tags could be really granular, they could be, or not. Binary format, same kind of deal, except that it's encoded in Google Flat buffers. So you could have, so the IDL file is located in the source code. You could take that, compile it to whatever language you're using, and just open up a socket, UDP, TCP socket, and just start sending data. So sending data to Timely. You could do it different ways. You could, right from your application, you could just open up a socket and start sending data. You could send it to a local collection agent. OpenTSDB's T collector works because we're using the same API.
All right, so like They told me not to do a live demo unless I'm crazy, so I guess I'm crazy. So here, yeah, as Dave said, we did OpenTSDB at first, and we just hijacked their protocol. You would just go into Grafana and select OpenTSDB data source, and then people wanted us to actually do security, so we had to write our own Grafana plugin. So that is running here. So I have, this is actually in the source code. It's a standalone timely server that fires up in a Docker container. It uses mini Accumulo cluster, and then it starts shoving a bunch of fake data at it. And then it has another Docker container that has Grafana that gets configured with timely all plugged in and everything, so you can play around all you want. I guess what's cool and kind of powerful is what we stole from OpenTSDB is all the aggregation that's going on behind the scenes. So if you look at these charts, here's like CPU user by host, and then we have it rolled up by rack, and then this is everything all aggregated together. And the way you aggregate, you know, basically all these three queries are the same query into from Grafana into Accumulo, and Accumulo is doing the same scans, just aggregating the data differently before it sends it back to us. So you can come in and change, you know, what kind of aggregator you want, and it'll go off and do whatever. You know, switch it. I think it was on Max, wasn't it? You can go get average times, and that's, you know, it'll just roll it up however you want. So it gets kind of dicey when you start creating complex charts. You have to know how you input your data. So when you have timely installed over here, we have this metrics browser built in that shows you all the metrics that have been ingested, and then all the different tags and the various values those tags have come with. So another thing Grafana lets you do is create templated charts with these tags and metrics and things. I have an example of that, and Timely supports all of that. So here, these, you know, you can just come in here and create like a generic browser and select the different metrics. And then this is hooked up to an aggregation, and just play around all you want. And you could create instance pull downs and stuff like that. So it gets pretty flexible, and Timely seems to be pretty fast at aggregating your data up and sending it off to you. So the other thing to show off here quick is the authorizations. So here I've logged in, here, Timely. When you get Timely up, you kind of have to come in here and log into Timely. And what this does is it looks up your authorizations in the Timely configuration file, and applies those, and sets a cookie in your browser, a secure cookie. And then all your queries are done with your authorizations. So once you've logged in, the user I have here has the authorizations ABC. He's allowed to see, you know, some receive errors or whatever. This is all fake data, so it doesn't matter. Then another browser I have going, I've logged in with a different user, has DEF, but not ABC, so you can see they do what we expect Accumulo to do and only return the data they're allowed to see. So I guess that's pretty much it. There's a lot of documentation and setup on how to get all this going on our website. So from that, I think I'll turn it over to Drew. He's got more on the security aspect of what we had going on here. Oh, wait, here, actually, I forgot this part. There's a lot of charts in here that I just kind of went through, but included with the plugin in Grafana, we built a bunch of dashboards that are pretty generic. So if you did the Hadoop Metrics 2 stuff that Dave was talking about, if you install that, we created dashboards for this. So this is just some generic stuff you would get if you used Collect D. This is based on a test we ran on Amazon. Here's the HDFS dashboard we created, DataNode Metrics, continued. And this is a bit of a Accumulo overview. Maybe one day we'll replace the monitor with just this. It's kind of, or we'll trust this enough to not look at the monitor anymore. But that's that. Oh yeah, subscribing to data. That is another thing that's kind of coming up in the future is have an interesting iterator that basically sets up a subscription and periodically kind of just pauses and looks to see if there's new data that has come in. And with our WebSocket interface, you can subscribe to a time series, and then every time data shows up to Timely, Timely will push that data to your client. So we're looking at using that to supply various analytics and hopefully be able to do some more interesting things with that in the future. That whole system isn't really finalized at all yet, but we've kind of done proof of concepts around the whole subscription API. So hopefully that's maybe the next talk, how we've done all kinds of awesome analytics by next year with that stuff. Now is true for security.
So before I talk about security a whole lot, I just want to say the thing that really excites me about Timely is the fact that for once we have visibility into all levels of what's going on in our clusters, instead of just an idea of maybe what's happening on HDFS or what's happening in the Accumulo monitor page. We can see everything from like temperature, hard drive spin, CPU, I/O stats, all the way up to things happening in our application at the same time, right? So having all of that data sort of aggregated into one location is really, really powerful. Through the Amazon tests, you could see them in the graphs. For instance, we could really understand what the impact of a tablet splitting was. So we were running Accumulo continuous ingest and could really easily see it trucking along, and then all of a sudden a tablet splits, and we see how different performance metrics drop out right away as that split's happening. So I think that's really cool because, you know, the systems that we run on top of Accumulo, they're complex, and being able to have visibility into what's going on there is really, really important. But with Timely, you know, in terms of security, I think there's some sort of theorem out there, maybe we'll call it Drew's theorem, that if you build a data store on top of Accumulo, people are going to want to put things into it that require cell-level security. So after we quickly were collecting some metrics for our clusters and things like that, we really had the need to try to store some other sorts of information in there that could be protected adequately. So that's how we came across our security implementation. Dave's already mentioned that we provide a special tag on each metric that allows you to specify a Accumulo visibility string. Now this gets a little tricky because sometimes you'll have to do some mapping in your application between whatever visibility context or taxonomy you have to how that's expressed in Accumulo. But nevertheless, once you've done that, Timely doesn't do much in terms of processing those visibilities. We just flatten it so it's represented consistently as those tuples get stored in Accumulo. So that handles things when we're putting data into Timely, but what about the authentication and authorization side of things? Well, with Spring Security, we've implemented some plugins. Out of the box, you get a password authentication plugin that allows you to enter a username and password. That's the one that Grafana uses. We also can do client-side certs and associating the DN on those certs with a pre-configured set of authorizations in the back end. So out of the box, these are really simple. You can get going with them very quickly, but not really good for a production system. The nice thing about Spring Security, it's really extensible and can be used to sort of maybe tap into Active Directory or LDAP or something like that, some other source of role information for your users. Jim already demonstrated how the workflow works. Whether you're using Grafana or some sort of other browser-based front end, users will connect to the login HTTPS endpoint in Timely hosted by the Timely server. They'll get authenticated, they'll get their roles cached on the server side, and then get a secure cookie returned to their browser that can be used for further communications. But there's all sorts of different options in terms of how security can be configured with Timely. You don't need to require that people authenticate. We have this notion of anonymous access as well that can be turned on. We have a number of different SSL providers that you can use depending on what you're comfortable with in your environment, whether it be the base JDK provider or OpenSSL, which works quite well for a lot of native connections. The SSL file locations like your trust store and your server-side certs are also configurable. In addition to SSL ciphers, we provide a reasonable set of default SSL ciphers, but if you need to customize those for your particular environment, you can do that. Also, configuring things like session cookie expiration in terms of how often folks will have to log in, and various CORS properties, because with Grafana, you can have all requests into Timely made directly from the client instead of having to go through a proxy or something along those lines. We already talked about how we support HTTPS and through the WebSocket interface, WebSocket secure layer, but then also sort of a nice thing to have on the user side is HSTS, where if you connect with HTTP to Timely, it'll automatically upgrade you to an HTTPS connection, and your browser will cache the fact that secure is preferred on this channel, and as a result, you'll never get redirected when you come back. I mentioned anonymous access. There's a variety of different modes we can run in. If it's enabled, anonymous access can be, unauthenticated users will only see the things that are unlabeled, whereas authenticated users will see the things that they're allowed to see. Or you can shut down anonymous access entirely, and unauthenticated users will receive an error message. So depending on how you're deploying this, how you're using it in your production environment, you can configure it in a variety of ways. Dave's going to talk a little bit about the roadmap for what's next in the future with Timely.
Thanks, Drew. So a couple of things that we were kicking around for the future. Summarization of historical data. So trying to keep more data online and accessible, but trying to reduce the amount of storage that we take up on a disk. A new time series API. So now that we actually have our own Grafana plugin for Timely, we can kind of divorce ourselves from OpenTSDB and evolve, add additional features and things like that. A client, so Jim's kind of kicking around a client right now, a client to pull down data using the subscription API and work with analytics. Enrichment, so Grafana supports the notion of annotations. So the fact that like your entire data center went down at a specific point, and that's why all the charts went to 0. So you could annotate that, provide that annotation into Timely, and then Grafana will query that annotation and actually display it on the charts along with your time series data. Deploying Timely, Java 8, required for Accumulo and Timely. Tested with Accumulo 1.7 and now 1.8, and Hadoop 2.6. Standalone mode, which Jim showed here. You can run it on your laptop. You could, it's pretty easy to get up and running, kick the tires, and make sure, see how it works for you and your environment. If you shut it down, you lose all your data. Non-standalone mode, the Timely servers, you can scale them horizontally, you can put them behind a load balancer, they don't interact with each other, it'll work. So now I have a couple deployment examples. So we have one Timely server set up running now Accumulo 1.8, at the time 1.7.1, on 26 tablet servers with single disk hosts. On single disk hosts, we had some hardware with just single disks. Timely receiving about 2.75 million metrics per minute. And each metric had about 10 tags, so we're inserting about 20 million keys per minute into Accumulo. So that's where that storing each tag, storing it n ways, that's where you see this. At the time that this was written, we had a little over 2 trillion keys in the metrics table. It was 8.75 terabyte unreplicated, and works out to be about 4.3 bytes per key, or about 40 bytes per metric. So this is where we get into the savings, the cost savings of the run length encoding and the compression, the block compression in Accumulo. Second example, 2 Timely servers behind a load balancer, running 31 tablet servers. same kind of hardware configuration on single disk hosts. Timely servers, in this example, 10 million metrics per minute they were receiving and pushing into Accumulo 71 million keys per minute, so over a million a second. Ratio is a little different here, 7 tags per metric. At the time I wrote this, 1.9 trillion keys, 7.5 terabytes unreplicated, and kind of around the same ratio, 4.3 bytes per key. Questions? Yes? Then the Accumulo master? Yeah, the timely server is its own process outside of Accumulo. It only interacts through Accumulo through the client API, the Accumulo client API. In this deployment, actually, I think they were running on the same host as the master. Yes? So we're not doing anything now. I don't envision taking timely and making it more complex. I think I'd rather just keep it simple and keep it fast and then integrate it with other products. So for example, you could subscribe to metrics and create alerts off of them, or you could set up your own kind of pipeline for doing that. Yeah, so you could create a WebSocket connection, subscribe to one or more time series, and you could specify it with the tags in the query or not to do the server-side aggregation, and then you'll get that data as it's being pushed into Timely. On the subscription, you can control the lag, how often it checks for updates and things like that, and then you could do some analysis and alert on it, right? So you could do some anomaly detection or whatever. Any other questions? Thanks for coming.